Greetings and salutations. Thank you for clicking on the video. Today I'm going to show you how to get started with VirtualBox. VirtualBox is software that will allow you to create a virtual machine on your existing computer. So you will basically create a virtual computer to have another operating system run in. This is very useful technology, and there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do this. You may want to make Linux distribution review videos on YouTube. This seems to be the software that everybody goes to do that. You might want to have a different kind of Linux running. Let's say that you use Linux Mint at home and you find that you have to learn how to use CentOS for work. Well, you can install VirtualBox and then you could spin up a CentOS installation and you can sit there and learn all of the ins and outs of CentOS. Also, you could have a copy of Windows running on top of your Linux machine. If for some reason you have to do something in Windows, you have software that you need to work with, or maybe you need Windows for work, well, put that Windows installation in a virtual machine, and then if anything happens to it, it's not going to affect your host system, number one. And number two, you can always just delete the entire machine and start over. It's not like having a computer there, that you have to deal with, having two separate computers. So there's a ton of reasons, and this is also great for just testing out new Linux distributions, checking them out for yourself. So let's jump into it. First off, before we do jump into it, let me say that VirtualBox is a heavy-duty piece of software. It has lots of options, lots of tweaks, lots of things that you can do with it. There is no way for me to cover all of them in this video. Most people won't use all of the features of VirtualBox anyway, but I do strongly urge you to read the documentation which is available on this website. You can download it as a PDF file and read it at your leisure, because then you'll have a really good idea of what this software can do. That's the best way to learn VirtualBox. Don't learn it like I did, just downloading and poking at it, because that can get a little bit frustrating and then you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so there you go. VirtualBox is definitely not the only virtualization software out there. VMware has a product. There's a product called Boxes. There's many. But this one seems to be kind of sort of a de facto standard in the Linux community. All right, so let's get into talking about it. The first thing we need to do is get it installed. And there's a couple of ways that you can do that, and there are advantages and disadvantages to each one. So the first thing I want to show you here is that in the Linux Mint Software Manager, you'll see that we have VirtualBox available. There's actually two versions. The first one is VirtualBox non-free, and then there's VirtualBox that is free. And this one is the one that Oracle puts out. There is some proprietary code in there, and you do have to sign a EULA to work with it. And this one is entirely open source, so that's the difference there. I like to use the one that comes from Oracle. I just find that it is a bit more stable, and you get all of the features working in there. But I don't want to install it from the repositories. And the reason why is because usually the one that's in the repositories is slightly older than the one that's available. And this is sort of like one of those deals where you really want the latest version, but I don't want it to update itself. There are PPAs available that will allow you to hook those repositories up to your Debian-based computer or Ubuntu-based computer. Debian doesn't have PPAs. And then you can just get the latest versions. They'll automatically update. What I prefer to do, just so that I can be in control of the update process, is to download the deb file from here. And so let's go ahead and look at the downloads page and talk a little bit about the process. So the first file that you want to download is right here. This is the extension pack file, and this gives you a lot of really groovy features. You want to have this downloaded first, and then you can choose your download or your installation method for VirtualBox. And no matter what operating system you want to put VirtualBox on, they have a solution available to you. We can do it for Windows, Mac, we can do it for Solaris, and we can do it for Linux hosts. So let's go ahead and click on Linux hosts. We're going to concentrate on that today. And you see we have this lovely list of stuff here. And we pretty much have a installation file available for every current version of Ubuntu. We have it for Debian. We've got it for OpenSUSE here. So it really doesn't matter. I mean, they have pretty much gone to great lengths to make sure that VirtualBox is available for whatever operating system you happen to be using. If you're going to install on Linux Mint, then you would come over here and you would grab one of these files. So you would then go ahead and download the deb package, and then you could use gdebi, or you could do a dpkg command at the terminal to install it, and then you'll have it on the machine. Whether or not your machine will actually be able to do virtualization is something you're going to have to figure out beforehand. Some older processors do not have the ability to do 64-bit virtualization. And if you would install VirtualBox on a machine like that, what you would end up with is a VirtualBox installation where you could only do 32-bit guest operating systems, and you would only get one processor core. Now that'll make more sense a little bit later on, okay? But you kind of want to know that your machine can do the virtualization in 64-bit. And some machines come with virtualization switched off in the BIOS. So you might install VirtualBox and it might come up and say, hey, the VirtualBox, that stuff switched off, you need to fix that. So then you would go into your BIOS and you would turn the virtualization on and then reinstall, and then it would work. So that's something to look out for. And they have all kinds of installation methods here. So it's not just download a file. I mean, it's pretty much every distribution of Linux. They tell you how to do it and the different ways to get it on your machine. All right. The next thing that you'd have to do, you would install VirtualBox. You would restart the machine. That's important because VirtualBox adds modules to the kernel that can only be activated on a reboot. And then once you did that, you could click on your extension packs and your download folder, and then that would automatically install. So now you're good to go, except for one more thing that you need to do, and that is you need to add yourself to the VirtualBox users group. And Linux Mint makes it really easy. Just come down here and click on groups, and then scroll down and find the VirtualBox user, VBox users here, and add yourself to that group. That's really important because you want to be able to communicate with the guest machine, and you want to be able to use some groovy features I'm going to show you. So that is something that you need to take care of. So once you've got that done, and once you've got that all set up, then we can get into creating a virtual machine. So I just close all that stuff, switch over here, and you will get something that looks like this. When you first start using VirtualBox, every time you click on something, a little tooltip's going to come up, or a little box going to tell you what's going on till you get used to it, and then you can tell the system that you don't need to see that again. In my case, this VirtualBox has been used for a while, so I don't get a lot of those. I've turned a lot of those off, but don't be too surprised if you see that. This is what the software looks like, and this is the hypervisor that runs on your desktop. This is what manages all of your virtual machines, and you can have many of them. And of course, the performance that you get is going to be determined by how much oomph your host hardware has. A lot of memory and a lot of processor cores certainly make virtual machines run very quickly. In today's demonstration, we're doing this on an i5 with 4 gigabytes of memory, so you really can't make them scream, but you can definitely make it work. Alright, so we're going to create a virtual machine. I'm actually going to install and set one up so you guys can see that, and then I'm also going to show you at the end of the video how to tweak the virtual machine to work with VirtualBox. So for this demonstration today, we're just going to do plain old Ubuntu. And when I put Ubuntu in the name field there, you'll notice that it chooses Linux and it chooses Ubuntu 64-bit. And that is exactly what we're going to use, so we can go forward here. Now we're going to figure out how much memory to give the virtual machine. And VirtualBox doesn't like it if you try and give a virtual machine more than half the memory that is available to the host. Okay, so in this case, I can give it, even if I just give it like 2048 megabytes of memory here, which would be 2 gigabytes, it's going to complain because there's some overhead. It's not just the memory that's assigned to the guest that you see here, but also it takes a little bit of memory to run the hypervisor and the video memory and all that other stuff. So for this video today, I'm going to go ahead and just set this for 1.5 gigs. And 1532 is certainly close enough. If you want to be really precise about it, it's like 1536 or something like that. So we go forward. And you can adjust these later, with the memory. So you could start your virtual machine off with a lot of memory, and then you could watch it and see how well it runs, and then you could just scale it back. And the less memory that you take away from the host, the more efficient everything's going to be as far as how quickly all this runs. Next, we need to create a virtual hard disk. And it offers to do that, so we're going to let it do that. And it tells us here that we need at least 8 gigabytes to install Ubuntu. I always go much bigger than that. Then it's going to give us the choice for what kind of container we want to put that disk in and what kind of file it's actually going to be in. There's a bunch here. One of them, you can see here that if you're used to using VMware, you can actually create a VMDK disk, which is a VMware disk image. But we're going to go with VirtualBox's VDI format because that'll work just fine. The next question that it asks us is whether we want to do a dynamically allocated disk or whether we want to do a fixed size. And what that means is if we do dynamically allocated, it will only create a file large enough to hold the data that's actually on the virtual hard disk. And this is very useful because, okay, let's say that you set a size for your disk of 100 gigabytes. Well, if you're just installing a Linux distribution and you might throw a few files in there, it's never going to take up that much space. So it's only going to actually take up the space for what's on the disk. And as you add more data to your virtual machine, that file will grow. It doesn't shrink automatically though. So for instance, if you had a dynamically allocated disk and you gave it, let's say, 40 gigabytes, and then you installed your system, and once you got the system installed, it took up 5 or 6 gigabytes, and then you put a 2 gigabyte file on that dynamically allocated disk is going to grow by 2 gigabytes. Even if you delete that file, it's still going to remain the same size. However, there are ways that you can shrink the disk back down. In other words, to ignore the unused space and then make that file smaller again. It's a bit complicated. I'm not going to get into it in this video, and most folks won't need to do that anyway unless you have some specific special reason for doing so. Of course, you can give it a fixed size, which means that whatever size you tell this little program here to make the disk is what the file size is going to be on the host's hard drive. And that is you can do that if for performance issues. Doing dynamically allocated disks sometimes can cut performance, slow things down a little bit, but dynamically allocated is fine for most folks, so we're going to stick with that. And now we have the place where we can choose a name for the virtual drive. In this case, we'll just stick with Ubuntu, that's fine. And then you can also choose the size. So for an Ubuntu installation that you're going to keep around for a while, you're going to play with, I like to make the system think it has at least 32 gigabytes. So to do that, I just click until it gets to 32 and create. Now we have created a virtual machine, but we are far from done. We have to do some more tweaking to get things to work. And we'll go through these settings here. So we'll go to Settings. All right. And the first thing is the General Settings. And we want to go to Advanced. And this is where we can activate the feature that will allow us to drag and drop files from the host desktop to the guest desktop. That's what I wanted to say. And this works sometimes it doesn't. I have learned to just not rely on it working. But I'm going to go ahead and activate it for the sake of the video. Most of the time I don't even bother with it. You can also share the clipboard, which is really useful. So you could copy some text in the host and then paste it in the guest. And we're going to be using that a little bit later on in this video. You can also put a description in here. some other things, but we're good to go as far as that page is concerned. Now on system, you'll see that we have the ability to adjust the memory here. We can also adjust the boot order and some other things that you can change. I pretty much just leave that stuff alone unless I have a reason to change it. And then here we can tweak the processor up a little bit, and you can set how many cores the virtual machine will get. All right, in this case, in this machine, we have an i5 processor. The i5 processor from Intel has 2 physical cores, and both cores are multi-threaded. And it shows you this here because you see we have this kind of line under here, and so we could give it, if we give it 2 processors, 2 processor cores, then we're actually giving it 1 thread for the 2 cores that are there. And if we go beyond that, then we're getting into multi-threading. So we'll leave it at 2. Down here you see an option where we can choose to turn the PAE NX feature on for the processor. I go ahead and turn it on. I'm not sure whether the guest operating system in Linux uses that or not, but why not? Turn it on. Basically, that's a kind of a pass-through feature that will allow more direct access to the processor if the host operating system should want to use it. So the next thing we set up here is display, and you can do all kinds of groovy stuff here. You can make this thing really, drive a couple of monitors and stuff like that. But for today, we just want to give it way more video memory. If you will recall, I did a video not too long ago where I showed a virtual machine. I was running Linux Lite. I gave it 64. And if you're not going to do anything graphics intensive, then 64 would probably be enough. But today we're going to install regular Ubuntu, and that has some 3D eye candy, so I'm going to give it 128. And it's going to be 1 monitor. And we will enable 3D acceleration. The next thing we need to look at is storage, and this is where we can control the virtual hard disks and the virtual DVD drives that are hooked up to the machine. And you see we have a hard disk hooked up to the SATA controller. We also have an IDE controller here, and this is where we would put our disk images, and also where the host machine's DVD drive would be hooked up, if you have one. So today we need to hook up a virtual drive. So we're going to add an optical drive, and then we're going to choose a disk, and then we're going to choose Ubuntu. So that is now hooked up to the machine, and that is just like I dropped a DVD in the tray, and we're going to boot the machine up off of it when we finally start the machine. If you are actually going to be booting up from a physical DVD, then VirtualBox will detect this when you start the machine if you don't have any drives hooked up to it, and it will offer to boot from that disk and hook it up to the virtual machine. And so you can do that quite easily. And you can also install in a virtual machine from a USB stick, and you could just connect your USB stick up and you can do it from there. Today we're going to do it from an actual file on the hard drive, which is an ISO file that is an image file of a DVD. And it's the same file that you would use to create installation media for pretty much any Linux distribution. Don't need to mess with audio. Come down here to network. The standard way that the network is handled for the guest operating system is to do it through the NAT protocol, which basically means that the guest will use the host's IP address, and it's sort of like it turns the guest operating system into like a big web browser. And that works okay, but if you're going to be doing anything fancy with the network, like you want to use SSH or something like that, a better way to do it is to set this up as a bridged adapter. And what that does is it actually goes out to the DHCP server that is in your router, and it will give the virtual machine an IP address on the local network, just like it would do any other physical piece of hardware. And that way you can get out to your local network and do SSH, and there's all kinds of reasons. I have also found that this is a much faster way to do this. For some reason, when you do NAT, at least on my computers, the download rate seems to be really, really slow. But when I go to a bridged adapter, it's like getting it directly from my router, so it works a little bit better. We don't need to fool with serial ports. And we may want to hook a USB device up, so we can go ahead and configure this. And I want USB 3 support because the machine that I'm using has it. And it will actually emulate whichever one of these you want. Like if you're installing a really old operating system that only recognizes USB 1, then it'll do that. But you kind of want to have it matched up to whatever's on the computer for the best performance. So I'm going to put USB 3 here. Let's set up a shared folder. That's something that is extremely useful, especially if that drag and drop feature I was talking about doesn't work. And we're going to right-click on shared folders. We're going to add a folder. And I'm going to choose Other from this list. And we're going to do Desktop, and we're going to do the Work folder on the desktop. Got some stuff in there. And we want that to be automatically mounted when the virtual machine boots up. This is a nice feature to have. That way it's going to always be there and ready for us, and we won't have to go searching for it or anything like that. So we have a shared folder set up, and finally the user interface. And the main thing that you're going to want to change here is where the little pop-up drop-down menu appears when you have your virtual machine running in full screen. So if you're running Ubuntu, you probably want that to be at the bottom of the screen. If you're running Linux Mint or something that has a panel down here at the bottom, then you'd want it to be at the top. Since we're installing Ubuntu with the Unity desktop in this video today, I'm going to go ahead and leave that at the bottom of the screen. So we pretty much have this all set up and we're ready to rock and roll. We've set up all of our little features and done our tweaks. So we can click OK. And clicking OK is important there. If you just click out of that box, none of those settings take. And now we have our virtual machine ready to go, and we can boot it for the first time, and we can see whether we got it all right. And it appears we do, because I'm seeing the boot sequence here for Ubuntu 16.04. And then once you get this far, if you get it booted up, then you just install the operating system just like you would in a physical machine. Now in today's video, I'm not going to be covering the installation of Ubuntu 16.04. We're really just talking about using VirtualBox to create virtual machines. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here in a few moments, and we're going to pick it up after I get Ubuntu installed, and then I will show you the ways to install things like video drivers, the guest editions, and all that stuff. And you'll find out what that is when we come back here. So Ubuntu is getting ready to be installed, and as soon as it's done, we'll pick up. Ubuntu is installed, so we are ready to restart. And let's go ahead and do that. A lot of the times when you restart a virtual machine, it will lock up. And that is okay at this point. If you've just installed it and it just quits working, you can just reset the thing and it'll work when it comes back up, because the system at this point is already installed. So what we need to do next is we need to get the drivers and guest additions installed on our Ubuntu system so that we can have more functionality in our virtual machine. The main thing we need is the video drivers. We've got to have those or we will not get 3D video. This has locked up. Don't worry about it. Just come to Machine, and we will reset. Hopefully it has ejected the installation media. It should do that automatically, so when this boots, it should go into Ubuntu. Some distributions of Linux already have the drivers installed for VirtualBox. Linux Mint is one, Linux Lite is another, Manjaro will install all of that, so you shouldn't have to install the guest editions just to get basic functions. And we're going to look at a couple of ways that you can do that if the Linux distribution that you're using doesn't do that. Ubuntu doesn't. So I can go ahead and log into the desktop. And it'll take it a second here to get itself together as it loads up the desktop for the first time. It has to create all the folders. It has to set all the settings and do all that stuff. So first boot always takes a little bit longer. And I'm listening to the hard drive go crunch, 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 crunch. And we have our Ubuntu desktop. But we do not have video support, and I can test that by putting it in full screen mode and see the screen does not resize to fill the screen, which is something that is provided by the drivers. You could come in here like this and go to drivers. Okay, and then we could install it this way, and I'll show you what that looks like. So the machine is searching for drivers. And Ubuntu 16.04 is really working 2 cores of that i5 processor, because I hear them fans spinning up. Anyway, you could come through here and you would install this one, and then you would install this one. Like this one first, come back and install the second one again. And that is how you would get it in the system. And that works pretty well. Sometimes if it decided that day that it doesn't want to cooperate, the drivers won't install properly, you'll get a bunch of errors and stuff like that. So we're going to do it manually so I can show you how to do that. Sometimes this is the only way to get the guest editions installed. And I went to machine here, or I went to device rather, and then I clicked on insert the guest editions CD image, which is just like I dropped it in the drive. You see it popped up down here. Ubuntu has picked up the auto run script on that disk, so we can go ahead and just click run. And it wants my password. With some distributions of Linux, there are some things that need to be installed before you can install these drivers. It has to have the development tools that it needs to build the modules for the kernel. And so you may have to install make, GCC, a couple of other things before you can actually install these drivers properly. And the best way to find that out is just do a little research in advance and see whether that stuff's going to be there or not. Just do a search like install guest editions on Fedora, and a guide should come up, and it will tell you pretty much what you're going to need. Ubuntu comes with all of the stuff already there. Although it is saying here that it didn't find the headers for the kernel. But Ubuntu usually installs the headers, so don't know what's up with that, but we'll see what it does. If it works, you know. This is not an exact science installing these things, because it's just a little bit complex, and it's just the way that Oracle has done this is they're trying to make it to be as non-distribution specific as possible, which is the reason why you compile the drivers locally. So you might have to play with this a little bit, might have to look it up depending on what distribution you're working on. But this appears to be doing what it's supposed to do, even though it said it couldn't find the headers, because it is creating the modules. So this is a good thing. And it does take it a little while because it is compiling this stuff. Okay. So the next thing that we need to do is to restart Ubuntu here to see whether that took. So we'll shut down. You see how slow this is and draggy. Like if I open the dash, you see that this just takes forever to, it's doing all that stuff. That's because we do not have 3D acceleration. So let's shut it down and we will restart. And when it restarts, those drivers should start working, and then we should have actually a much faster experience. Also, I have found that with later distributions of Linux that offer the microcode driver for the processor, that makes a virtual machine run a lot faster. So I will go back and install that at some point should I choose to keep using this virtual machine. And I'm excited, man. We're going to get the Ubuntu desktop. We're going to be able to full screen it and do all kinds of crazy things in here. It's going to be awesome. Password in, start the desktop. Okay, now we should be able to resize this window. And the desktop should resize with it, and it's doing it. So now we can go into full screen mode, and now it will fill the entire screen. Okay, now the next thing that we need to work on is getting the shared folders to work. So right now, if I open up the file manager here, you'll see that we have this thing hooked up that says it says SF work, which is the shared folder that we set up, and it hooks up to the system like a device. So it's like we put a USB stick or another hard drive in the thing. And if I click on this, guess what? We don't have access. So we can't actually get to that folder that we shared. That's kind of a bummer. So how do we get access? Well, what we're going to need to do is add ourselves to a group in the guest machine so that the permissions will line up. That's how VirtualBox takes care of permissions in Linux hosts and guests. They do it through groups. So we need to add ourselves to this group. And as I stated earlier, Ubuntu, well, I didn't state this earlier, but I was talking actually to somebody else about this a little while back. Ubuntu does not give you a graphical way to work with groups. So we're going to have to do this manually. And we're going to use that clipboard feature I was telling you about earlier in the video. So anyway, I did state that earlier. I just didn't state it here, just to make that make sense. Okay, so we have a terminal up, and we're going to go get our command. And I had this all typed out and ready to go in advance to avoid typos and problems. So we'll copy that, click on our virtual machine, and we should be able to paste that in. Yep. So we'll run that command. Okay, and we're going to have to log out and log in to get this to work. Okay, we'll log back in, see if that works, and if that doesn't work, we'll just restart the whole system. And now we have access to the files here in the shared folder. So anything that I do in the virtual machine in this shared folder is going to be happening in this folder right here. So I can open that up and show you. It's exactly the same thing. So if I make changes here, we'll see it on the virtual machine. So I'll just create a dumb document. And we'll call it test.txt. And we'll see if it appears here. I probably have to refresh this to be able to see that. There it is. So we refresh the folder and now it shows up. So that's pretty cool. It's like what this is a network share that's done from the host machine to the guest machine. And so I can do groovy things here, like I have some files. I can open this with Archive Manager. Okay, and now I'm going to extract this. Where am I going to put it? I'm going to put it right in the home. Well, I'm not going to put it in work. Put it in the home folder. Okay, now we should see my pretty little face. Now it'll show up when I log in and log out, because I just put that file in there. So that's how you can use the shared folders feature. Now what you're also supposed to be able to do is drag and drop to the desktop. And we did activate that feature, but it doesn't work on this particular setup for some reason. I've had it work before, but it doesn't seem to work with what I'm doing right now. Maybe it's because it's Linux Mint as the host. I have no idea. It looks like it wants to do it, but it doesn't actually do it. So that one is the most flaky feature of the system. But there are so many ways around it. You can set up shared folders. You can use a Samba network share. You can use an NFS share, or you could use SSH to transfer files back and forth, whatever is most comfortable for you. So there you go, gang. We have a fully functional virtual machine, and we have accelerated video. Of course, it's not going to be the same performance as if it was running on the host machine, but it's enough to give you the idea. And there are ways that you can do a direct pass-through to another video card using VirtualBox. That's something that has come along with later Linux kernels, and if you want to learn how to do that, you could go check it out. But you actually have to have a separate video device that is going to be devoted to the virtual machine. But if you're a hardcore gamer and you want to play video games in a virtual machine, that might be something that you want to do. Okay, so our virtual machine is set up. I just want to touch on a couple of things before we wrap up the video. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down Ubuntu. And we can go ahead and close this folder. We don't need this open right now. And go ahead and close that because we don't need that. Close without saving. Okay, you may have noticed up here where we have this thing about snapshots. And this is a feature that's very useful if you're going to be doing a lot of testing. Okay, so I just created my Ubuntu machine. We know that works. It's working fine. There's no problem there. Well, I can create a new snapshot of that Ubuntu machine. And then what I will be able to do is roll back to that at any point in time. And this works with the virtual hard disk and create some files that will keep up with the changes. And so at any time I can say, okay, well, I've trashed it, I want to go back, and then I could restore my snapshot. So that's a feature that you definitely want to check out. And also, before we wrap this up, I want to show you where VirtualBox has put everything so that you kind of understand a little bit about what's going on. So I have a folder in my home folder here called VirtualBox VMs, and here's where they all live. If I had 2 or 3 of them on the machine, then they would all go here. So we have a folder called Ubuntu in there, and that is the virtual machine that we just created. And then this is the actual file that you would use to import this VBox file here. If you wanted to add a virtual machine that was already created and import it to VirtualBox, you would just click Add Machine and then go find this file and click on it, and it would hook it up to the hypervisor. And this is the actual hard drive file. This is our VDI file that has the image of our virtual disk that the operating system is installed on. So if we look at the properties here, remember I gave it 32 gigabytes, and this is just taking up 5.6 gigabytes at this point. So what you can do is, if you create a virtual machine and you would like to archive it somewhere, you'd like to send it to somebody or whatever the deal is, I mean whatever you want to do, then you could put this file in a tar file, like a tar GZ file, compress it, and then you could just extract it later somewhere else and import it into your VirtualBox. And you can also do that. You can do it to save a copy for some reason. If you want to have a nice, clean, generic copy, you could do it that way. And so there you go. Just a little bit more about how the system works. Also, one of the cool things that you can do, which I think is actually quite useful if I'm doing a lot of work in a virtual machine at any given time, is that you can go in here and tell this thing create a shortcut on the desktop. So now I have a shortcut. I don't have to open up the hypervisor there. I can just click on this and VirtualBox will open up Ubuntu, and here we go. Now I actually intend to be doing some stuff with this, so I'm going to keep it around for a while. And so I guess I'm going to go ahead and boot this up and update the system and do all the tweaks and install the software that I need and that sort of thing. So there you go, gang. That is an introduction to how to use VirtualBox, and as I stated earlier in the video, this is an introduction. There is a lot more to this. There's a lot more tweaks and features and things like that that you can get into. A lot to learn about VirtualBox. So I hope this kind of points you in the right direction. You have a lot of fun playing around with different operating systems on your computer. So thank you for watching. Be sure and check out freedompenguin.com. Got lots of great articles in there about Linux from contributors like myself. Check out Easy Linux on the web if you'd like me to work with you to get a nice clean Linux install and get started with Linux. And also check out Easy Linux on Facebook and give it a like if you would. Lots of great things appear there. I share all kinds of stuff on Facebook on that page, including every video that I do. So if you miss it in the subscriptions for your YouTube channel, it will definitely appear there, as this video will as soon as I get done and shut up and actually go post the thing. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again soon.